Hey guys, welcome to the first Google Hangout of 2018 and the second last for this year's Chief Resident Incubator. We're super, super lucky to have the amazing Dr. Dara Kass. She's a true rock star and legend, and she's going to be talking to us about developing a niche / life after chief residency, which I know you guys are all very excited for. While, of course, she's very well known to most of you, she is, above and beyond all the other positions she holds, the founder of Feminem. And I actually want to turn the stage over to her directly so she can start talking about how she built up this amazing organization.
Well, thank you, Maureen, for having me. Funny, actually, is that you say life after chief residency, and that like struck a chord at me because I was not a chief resident. It's actually there's like a cohort of us now that are still in academics that we're not chief residents that kind of meet up and greet up and remind ourselves that we can still be good even if we weren't the chief resident. So Mark Silverberg, hi, how are you? Anyway, so I am really happy. This is awesome. It's probably one of my most fun things to talk about is kind of career trajectory and how I got here, what got me here, and all the different things I did before I got here. So to give you guys a little bit of background, I am Dara Kass. I started Feminem 2.5 years ago. My story was that I was a resident at Kings County and downstate in Brooklyn, and then I graduated from residency in 2007, which is a really long time ago. Anyway, and then I went to a hospital called Staten Island University Hospital as a faculty member right away. It was actually an adjunct department for where I did my residency. So it was one of our satellite programs. And I actually always wanted to do education, which is what a lot of people graduating from residency want to do, right? It's all we know. So I went and I was actually the site director for our residency at Staten Island, thinking that I would actually be an adjunct associate program director eventually. But by virtue or truth or whatever it was, Staten Island decided to start its own residency about 2 years after I got there as the site director. So I was actually one of the most natural choices to help start a residency right away, like 2 years out of my residency choice. So we started a residency. I actually was part of a group that wrote the program information forum and started the whole residency ourselves. And I was an assistant program director from the very beginning, which was a great experience, not one that I had expected, but it got me to understand a lot about the infrastructure of curriculum development and program development and stuff like that. In the course of that, I went to CORD, which is by far the best faculty development conference out there. The Council of Residency Directors, which you guys know. And going to my first CORD conference kind of transformed everything for me. I got to meet all the people that I had been reading about forever, and I had been hearing their voices, and I had known that they had trained the people that I had trained with. And so at CORD, I started making a lot of connections, networking with people. And at that same time, I started having my own kids. So here I was, a young female physician married to somebody outside of medicine who was having kids while building an academic career. And I was uncovering all these things that we had not ever really talked about and nobody was really giving me a landscape for. And CORD had this listserv that was really useful. And so I kept asking questions on the CORD listserv about things like, what are you doing for people for maternity leave or pumping or whatever it was? And I would get responses and I would send them out. And I kind of started developing this idea around information as like accumulation and communication. And so over the next few years in CORD and within my academic career, I did a lot of asynchronous learning and curriculum development. So I became the director of the FOAM track, ultimately, the Innovations in Medical Education track. And because I was an early tweeter and I was an early Facebooker and I was an early podcast listener, and I knew there was value in that. And so what ultimately happened is after let's say 4 or 5 years at Staten Island, I knew 2 things needed to happen. I knew I needed to move institutions because I had started doing a lot of stuff that I needed a medical school behind me to do. So I thought I wanted to be a dean of students where I could influence the careers of women in medicine, not just in emergency medicine. And I wanted to be in a larger infrastructure. And so I left Staten Island to become the director of medical student education at NYU. And at the same time, I was very active in this kind of asynchronous, innovations in medical education world. And I was active in the Academy for Women in Emergency Medicine. So all these things kind of were looming around my head and happening in my world. And I was at CORD, after I got SAM and ASAP and all the classes. I'm at CORD in 2015. and I'm standing at the phone bar. So we had decided to do this kind of, meet and greet area where we'd help people with their Twitter accounts and whatever it was. And this woman comes over to me, who I knew from a residency program. She was like furious. And she was like, I'm sick of this. Why do they always call me? We were like in Phoenix, Arizona, but we lived in New York, right? She was screaming that her son's school had called her for like, I don't know, the umpteenth time that he was missing from school. He was a high school junior. And he wasn't in school. He wasn't in homeroom. And so on the card, it said to call the mom, right? But the mom was in Phoenix and the dad had stayed at home for 17 years, right? Since he was born. And she always put the dad's name first, and nobody ever called the dad. And why doesn't anyone do that? And what do other women in medicine do? And I was like, I've read an article about this. I don't understand. And we basically realized that all these silos had been discussing gender equity in medicine, but nobody had been communicating with each other. So if you were in AWEM, you were talking about the AWEM stuff, and in SAM. And if you were in, ASAP, you were talking to the AWEB group. And if you were on CORD, maybe you were on the listserv. But, there was no cohort of people that they could like anchor their questions and discuss policies and articles and all the things that were happening in academics around women in medicine and gender equity and stuff like that. And so I was like, wait a minute. I kind of have the skill set. I know how to build a website. I understand social networking and marketing. I understand people. And there is this massive number of women coming up in residencies and they need help. So what are we going to do? So I was like, I called my husband and I said, I have an idea. I want to make a website and I want to fund it ourselves and I want to build it. I don't want to ask permission from anybody, because one of the things I knew was that if I had tried to do this through a formal institution, it's kind of like ALIM, right? If I tried to do it through a formal academic institution, I would have had to ask permission for every question I asked. But I was going to hit on topics that were going to be controversial. And so I didn't want anyone to tell me that it was wrong because it was, not politically correct. I'm really good at not being politically correct, but I'm also really good at getting things done. So he said, go for it. You want to do this? Let's do it. And so Feminine started in 2015, in September of 2015. And it's iterated like crazy since then. But it really grew out of, and then I actually stepped down from the academic world. So I went to become a per diem faculty member about 8 months ago. I don't run medical student programs anymore. I stopped being an assistant program director because you have to be the chief of only one fiefdom. And so one of the things about developing your niche is often as it changes, you may have to reframe your expectations for yourself, which is actually a really big deal, and we'll talk about a lot. And so over the 4 years since I left Staten Island, and since the 2.5 years that Feminine has started, I've evolved into this person. I mean, the same person, but my career looks nothing like I thought it was going to look 5 years ago. I didn't expect to own what is essentially a multimedia company, right? Feminine now has a podcast and an in-person conference and a blog and a job board and a speakers bureau. And we are now starting to write policies on policies supporting women in medicine. We are asked for our opinion on all kinds of things. And so we're basically this kind of clearinghouse for the issues surrounding women in medicine and for the men that want to be champions. And so it's kind of awesome. Oh, and by the way, I have a flexible schedule and I don't work when I don't want to, which is the best part. So that's the story. Fair enough?
Amazing, Dara. Thank you for at least the intro.
Well, you don't have to flip out that Will keeps dropping and not dropping. I see your seizure face going on. It's fine.
So Dara, do you want to give us some of, now that we kind of have a little bit of background on you, do you want to give us some of the tips to kind of how you navigated as you were working through this changing career, especially when you're now at a point where you wouldn't have even envisioned yourself to be at 5 years ago?
Yeah, so the first step, you don't have to make every decision at the same time, right? You literally have to decide one thing at a time. So you have to know, what do you like? What are you good at? What are the opportunities in front of you? And just think about that. So if you look at all the different things I've done, I kind of weighed the opportunities in front of me. If I've sometimes created the right opportunity. Like if you think about it, I graduated from residency thinking I was going to be an associate program director in the program I was already in, and then didn't expect that I was going to start my own residency, and I didn't even want to. But when that was the opportunity in front of me, I took it. And then when that wasn't the right opportunity anymore, I then looked for the right opportunity. So I went out and sought out the job at NYU, as opposed to just like waiting for it to come to me. I think a lot of the niche building and finding is to both be in tune with what's in front of you and being offered, and also to know what you're good at and what you want to do. And if that opportunity is not there, to seek out something that might be out there for you, and to have a really, really good network. I mean, that's like fundamental to success in any career, is to have a lot of people around you and to have them tell you when opportunities present and have them know what you're looking for.
Perfect.
It seems like toggling between two.
I think so.
With the big W?
Exactly.
Nice.
I think the next step will be opening it up to the chiefs that are here so that they can start asking you questions, and then you can kind of work through what their specific questions and things are. And as things go along, I'm sure you'll have other tidbits that remind you and make you think of things. So does anybody want to start with their questions for Dara?
I can start.
Okay.
So you had mentioned, Dara, like one of your supporters early on, and I'm like really big in the concept of like a board of advisors or support group that everyone kind of has. How, like whether organically or intentionally, did you like grow that network like during at the end and like as you became like a new attending? How did you grow that network, and like what roles did those people have in like developing your niche? I already heard like it sounds like one of them had played a very critical part, but like how did you? Yeah.
No, so I'm a extrovert by nature, right? Not everybody is. So I love to I like solve problems out loud. It's one of the most important things that I do that I know about myself. So one of the things, and I have this, now I've collected this network of mostly women, although, you know, I'd argue that my husband is probably one of my biggest mentors and peer mentors, because I think out loud with him all the time, and mostly it's yelling, but that's a different story. And so basically as I've gone and joined residencies, groups as an attending, I've always had these kind of clusters of people that I trusted. And in the beginning, it was like a clinical trust, right? So if I had a clinical question on shift and I knew that one of my people was in another area of the ER, I would run and ask them, you know? And that was how I was raised as a resident. I was in a very close residency emotionally, and we kind of knew to lean on each other. And that was when it started. And then as I went to conferences, I became friends with people outside of my immediate network. And then I began to lean on them for things that were a little bit more developmental, or something I didn't feel like I could ask at my own residency. You know what I mean? And you'll see that those people will be there for you, and you'll be there for them. So like even right now, there is a network of women, we're undercover, you won't know who we are, across the country, that are like spread around like a spider web. And, you know, if anything happens to anybody out there, we'll connect ourselves. You know, it's kind of like a undersea mafia. And, but we really help each other in this career development aspect. And more importantly, in this like navigation of a landscape that not anyone else has really done. It's how you're a parent of young children while you're building programs and navigating. My peers are now thinking about applying for chairmanships, which is crazy. And what does that look like? So I guess the answer is find people you trust, connect with them in a really organic way, stay connected with them. I mean, text messaging and Facebook are awesome for that stuff, and Twitter, and then just have a lot of them. And don't ask everybody for everything. Just go to one person every so often for the thing you need from them. Is that good? I will.
So since Will is back and stable, how about we have him ask the next question?
Oh, God. I don't even know what you guys asked. I'm really sorry. But my phone and my laptop both died on me. So now I'm using my desktop. Hopefully it works. Fingers crossed. Thanks again for doing this. I'm Will, for everybody who doesn't know me. I'm one of the chiefs over at GW. And I had a couple of questions for you. My first one, I really wanted to figure out, and it's partially because I'm going into sports medicine. And I kind of wanted to figure out what your philosophy is behind disrupting a market, because like Feminem is one of those things that is taking a lead on something that has become a cultural change for all of us. And I feel like the medical field does lag behind the rest of the world by a little bit. And I wanted to kind of get your idea of how exactly you disrupt a market and how do you maintain that disruption?
So I think that, yes, it's true. So I'm 80% good and 20% lucky right now, insofar as the problems I was trying to solve were actually smaller than the problems I'm solving now. So disrupting a market, an area, is to me is all about looking at a real problem and trying to solve it, and then seeing what happens. Right? Like you don't need to intentionally disrupt something. You know, it's like I just wanted to move forward on an issue that I felt was being stagnant. Right? We're not going anywhere. When we started, I didn't like the world has moved backwards in a lot of ways since I started Feminem and moved forwards. So there's an odd disruption, like paradigm going on. And some of it is that as long as you're true to the problem that you're trying to solve and that you're constantly asking, is this the same problem I need solved now that I had to solve 6 months ago? You'll always be relevant and current, which is kind of, I think, also what you're asking, right? So like when I set out to do Feminem, I just wanted to do a blog. I literally wanted to connect like mentors and mentees and have people know each other. I felt like I knew everybody and nobody knew each other. Now I find that I have to push the envelope on the conversation in a way I didn't have to do before. Some of it's that I have the leverage to do that because now I have a platform and you know, kind of like some people, I have credibility. And some of it's that the questions I'm asking and answering now are all of a sudden more relevant or even at risk of not being answered. Like I think when I started, I was more naive. And I thought that if I just opened up the conversation, things would start just fixing themselves. And I know that's not going to happen, right? Somebody has to take the lead and fix these things. I think sports medicine is interesting because, you know, it's a small niche for emergency medicine and a much larger niche for other things. So what do you want to disrupt in sports medicine that you think is going to be, that I'm curious, what do you want to disrupt?
I just want to have a good time.
Well, I think that's easy. I think that if you enjoy what you do, and I think that if you're true to your mission, then you can do that, you know?
Yeah. No, I definitely have a couple of ideas on how to do it because I feel like, and I don't want to go on a tangent here, but I feel like in sports medicine, emergency medicine has a lot to offer that the current market does not, because we're kind of in a unique position in emergency medicine where we're very familiar with dealing with the acute sick patient that family medicine, orthopedic surgery isn't necessarily quite as accustomed to dealing with. And there's this new concept of an acute care clinic, which deals with kind of like your urgent care orthopedic injuries. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that I'm interested in bringing to the West Coast and also, well, depending on where I end up, but I kind of wanted to dive into that. So I was very curious to see how to maintain.
We'll talk offline. I work on one of those, so we can talk about it. I mean, look at telemedicine, right? Telemedicine is another way that innovation and technology have disrupted. You know, emergency medicine is perfect at that. Like we're all suited to disrupt. We are disruptors, right? I'm an agitator. I'm a disruptor.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and I'm really good at it. Okay, what else?
Can I ask a second question?
I'm here.
Sweet. So how do you, I think it's a lot easier to create change in an environment that's favorable. And I'm trying to figure out, you know, if there are things that you want to accomplish and projects you want to get across, but it's more in a challenging or oppositional environment, how do you really create and then maintain that change?
So that's a really, that's a difficult question to answer because the answer is it's totally different for everywhere. So
it depends.
I knew that I could not create Feminem in a traditional academic setting, right? Like kind of like what I said before. Women's development programs specifically are beholden to the infrastructure of the institution, no matter the institution I was in, which is why everyone needs my help, because even in a really progressive institution, there are still limitations to what somebody will do and how fast they'll move, especially related to a topic like gender equity. If I hadn't started Feminem separate from an institution, and I was trying to do it under the guise of a formal institution, I would have been a lot more frustrated. I've learned for myself in my personality and in what I want to accomplish, it requires me to be affiliated but not employed full-time by any one institution. And that's been a great thing for me to realize. It's great insight, okay? That's not gonna be true for everybody. A lot of the programs that you're gonna wanna do are gonna have to be both like 100% affiliated with an institution, and that's gonna require patience that I don't do well with. And also an understanding of political culture that I also choose to not play in. I am very bad at hiding my feelings. I am very bad at waiting. I've gotten better at it, but especially with something that I feel like is so urgent, I just want to move forward. And so I've created a world where I can. But that's not true for everyone. So I think that the answer is have insight into how you work and how you're successful. Look at the skills of people that are very successful in traditional environments and look for them for guidance, not me. I have a bunch of friends who are exquisitely good at navigating the political landscape. And then they'll come and call me and be like, oh my God, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, but you were so cool in that meeting. And you like didn't, like, I would never know you were frustrated or upset or anything. And they're like, well, yeah, because it's not appropriate there. Meanwhile, I'm like screaming, banging tables, throwing papers and walking out of the room. So the answer is I am the last person to ask about that, but it's a skill that is worth developing if you want to be successful at all. Unless you want to build your own brand and business and then call me.
I might do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Perfect. Why don't we hear from Jane? We haven't heard from her yet.
Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane. I'm from Beaumont in Detroit. I have a question. I think it's great that you have done some like social media and some like non-traditional venues. If someone was interested in doing that and they hadn't had an experience, do you have any advice for how you might start exploring that?
You need to start social media like exploration?
Like not the typical like, you know, sports med or ultrasound or tox. If you're interested in, I don't know, like just like being part of research and industry, like how do you explore that without totally committing yourself to one path?
So if I understand what you're asking, so the best thing that you guys have now is, and I say social media, but I don't mean that in the way that you have to throw everything on the interwebs. There's like a Facebook group for everything, right? So there's a Facebook group for physicians for non-clinical careers. There's a Facebook group for, I'm sure, physicians who work in industry. There's a Facebook group for all these things. And people talk about what the experience is for that. And you can just listen to what people are saying, right? When I was coming up, there was no way to listen to other people's experiences without meeting them, greeting them, talking to them directly. Now you can kind of hover. I'm sure there is a hashtag that you can find on Twitter that's like, you know, physicians in pharma or something, where you could look and see what people are doing. That would be the first place that I would do to kind of look around. As far as research goes, so research is a very interesting track. I have realized how dedicated research, like over time, I've realized about these very dedicated researchers, people that get NIH funding, people that do the fellowships. That winds up being a pretty diligent track for a lot of reasons. So if you're interested in that, you really need a research mentor, somebody that knows a lot about how to get a K award, how to get an R award, what that means over time, and what kind of career options that leads you. It's a lot more rewarding than I thought it was when I first came out. It never spoke to me. I never thought it's what I wanted to do. Now a lot of my friends are researchers, and I see the value in it. I see like the excitement about it. But I would say that for now, I mean, you also don't have to choose right out of residency. I know a lot of people like Esther Chu, right? I was talking about her before because I talk about her all the time. She actually went back and did her research fellowship after being an attending for a year. When she realized that she needed a formal education in research in order to do the kind of research she needed to make a difference in the world. And so that happens not infrequently. So I think that just kind of pay attention to the landscape, scroll on Twitter, and join the incubators and stuff like that. And I think that you'll understand what to do.
Sure. I have one more question for you. I have been trying over the past year to kind of get like a structured mentoring for like the female residents in our department. But I'm graduating soon, and it hasn't really kind of taken off on its own. Do you have any advice for what are some like important things to make sure I try to like tie up before I leave so I can make sure that the program is sustainable?
Well, so the answer to not knowing what you've developed, it's hard to give advice on that. But I actually find that structured mentoring is never as good as people think it is when they build it. Personally, like it winds up falling flat for a lot of people because it's not natural. It's necessary for certain people. Like it helps build, let's say, like 25% of the relationships go somewhere, but 75% kind of fall flat. And so I think some of it may just be like letting it having a responsible person check in with it, and then seeing what's working and seeing what's not working and continuing to iterate it. The thing about structured programs is they require a fair amount of energy, and you're corralling people, which is hard. And so I find the best, like I was saying kind of before to Gretchen, the best networking relationships and career building board of directors and stuff like that I have found naturally. But again, I'm an extrovert. So people that are not that way need some assistance, I think, making that first connection. And then it's about facilitating that. So Jamie is with you, right? Jamie Hope is at your institution?
Yes.
So I would just make her solve the problem. She's like the perfect person to do that. And I would say that, leave it in the hands of somebody that's sustained. The other problem with programs developed by residents is they have to have a champion who's going to stay there longer than the resident. And so you have to make sure that that's something that, that is parked with a faculty member that can help have historical memory and advocate going forward.
Do you mind if I hop in for a second on that exact topic?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
So we started a more formalized women's group at UCSF this year, and it's in conjunction with a formalized faculty women's group. And I think by exactly what Dara was saying, that having one group that's going to be there beyond when I'm there to kind of continue on some of the more formalized things that we've initiated this year is like going to be critical. Because if we just started it this year and it left, like it would just continue to be like social events, which is what it has been historically in the past. But now we have like an annual faculty resident mixer, like a formalized thing. We are going to do like an annual like negotiations workshop. Like, so having some things that can be like annualized and set, I think is going to be helpful. Hopefully we'll see how it goes.
The other thing I will say about women's development groups in general or specific in the institutions is keeping them not just meet and greets and drinks and food is really important. And that's true for any development event. You want your women's group to have a curriculum that is centered around the issues. If anybody here has listened to the Feminine podcast, and if you haven't, you should. It's amazing. No, but it's actually, so it's twofold, right? The first part of it is lectures from the conference from last year. So every Tuesday, we release a lecture that was one of the conference lectures from last year. On Fridays, we release a podcast on a topic that we discuss, and it's almost always a paper or an article that's come out in the popular literature, or it's an article that was published in the medical literature that we use to pose a question that allows us to have a conversation. And I would bet you that the podcast probably would provide a lot of content for any women's group, and more importantly, mentoring relationships, right? So for example, if you sent out to your department, to your women's mentoring relationships, one of the podcasts, like, so we just did one yesterday with Risa Lewis and Jenny Beck-Esme. I don't know if you guys know who Risa is. She's an ultrasound guru, and Jenny is the co-editor of Feminine. So we talked about Why Women Don't Ask. It's a book by Linda Babcock on negotiation. A lot of people have read it. It turns out that women in interventional radiology or surgery, one of these women's groups, not in emergency medicine, is actually doing Women in Tox is doing it as a book club next month. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Call us and we'll join your book club and we'll have a conversation. And so if you just sent out the podcast to your pairs, let's say once every 2 weeks or once a month, and just said to that mentor-mentee pair, listen to the podcast and have a conversation, you would then set up an infrastructure for them to have something to talk about. A lot of these formal mentorship groups that don't provide them the curriculum structure to facilitate a conversation just wind up being very social, like, how are you, how am I? And then if you don't have similar lives, you wind up having nothing to talk about, right? So if my mentee is not a heterosexual woman with 3 kids, living in Brooklyn, it becomes a lot harder for me to be it's like this, you know what I mean? You try, but it's not. So this way you're giving them something substantive to talk about that's about the goal of the relationship. And it provides a framework for that.
Amazing. Thanks, Dara. How about we turn it over to Maninder? Do you have any questions for Dara?
Sorry, can I jump in really quickly about that topic?
Sorry.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, we actually tried to do something like, I'm sorry, I'm Aurelia. I'm from Metro Health Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. We attempted to have a kind of like we had a contract negotiation event for women to talk for women to talk about contract negotiations and how we don't ask for things, this like exact thing. But it was met with some controversy, I guess, in our residency, whether we should open this up to men. And I don't know how you guys have dealt with this in your residencies, or you know what if you guys have come up across this problem as in the past. You know, our thought was if the men were to hold a similar thing just for men, that we obviously would not be happy about that. But the conversations would probably be different if there were men present and than if it was just a space for women. So I don't know if you guys had any thoughts about that.
So what do the men think? I'm curious.
So it was actually brought up by the men, by some of the third-year male residents in our residency who wanted to know about contract negotiations and wanted to know how to deal with that, you know, as they're moving on in their careers.
So
we had the same problem, but I think they just wanted to have some wine. So
right. So I think that there's I mean, we can kind of bring this back on the rails for niche development eventually. But
yes.
When you're talking about women's programs, if you look at Feminem as an example, it's actually really inclusive. So we've had at our conference, some of our best champions at the conference were men, and we had 20% of our speakers were men. This year, again, we're going to have some pretty amazing guy speakers, and not just because they're guys, but because they have something important to say as well. But, one of the things that is really important is that when you do women's events, they have to have a culture of inclusion, but there are certain things that should be separate, because there are certain issues that people want to talk about and I say the word safe space, but I mean that honestly, where you can be viscerally honest about something that's bothering you. And sometimes it is this kind of like burden or gender dynamic related to what you need in the workplace, right? So that doesn't mean that men in your program shouldn't be given the opportunity to learn about negotiation, right? So if the only negotiation conversation your program is having is in the women's development group, then that's not good, right? Your program should have a negotiation series for all faculty and residents, whether it's a lawyer coming in or faculty members talking about the different contracts they got, and everyone should feel like they have that basic didactic education. Then, if there is a conversation about why women don't ask, so let's say a book club about that book, and that could be inclusive too, but then it's the kind of guys that come are the ones that want to be champions and they want to be part of that conversation, right? And so there will be a natural attrition away from some of these conversations that should just be gender specific, right? And that happens in a lot of things very naturally. But if the program's only education around networking and negotiation is a women's group, then they've missed the ball a little bit. And that's why I think the guys raised their hands. Having that said, I do think it's a good conversation, because I think that women physicians, especially new attendings, come, and this goes back to the niche development for Farine, I'm going to bring it back. The niche development is that when you're a brand new woman physician and you are planning on having children, which biologically is still the burden of the female, as far as I can tell, right? Not every female is going to get pregnant, not in every relationship, but for the most part, right? Babies come out of uteruses and only one gender has them. Then you are burdened with a level of anxiety, complication, interest in your first contract negotiation, right? So there is a gender-specific issue there that needs to be discussed. And you could put that on the table to any guy and they would not deny it, right? That has to be acknowledged and it has to be discussed, or else you don't have all the tools you need to be informed, right? And you need your faculty members to feel honest about reflecting on their contracts and their experiences and say, when I was a new attending and I was offered a program director job and I was also trying to get pregnant and I didn't have paid leave and we didn't have lactation space, I realized I had to step down. That is a very important conversation to have. And one of the things that I can say about my trajectory and the different things I've done is I have also always reframed my academic position to match my, like, the where I was in the world, like personally. So when I was a new attending and I was having babies, I went to an institution that I thought I could have a better schedule, right? And I felt like I could have more control over my life, and I didn't feel like I needed to be, I knew that having children would be a burden physically on me, and I needed to feel like I needed to control that aspect of my life. So I went to a job I felt comfortable with, and not one that I felt like I would have to be the best unknown employee, if that makes any sense. Once I proved myself there, then I got a lot of what I needed. And, being comfortable in your job allows you to be much better at what you're doing. I have always been a hard worker, and I've always followed through on what I needed to do. But I was acutely aware that being a new parent, getting pregnant, giving birth over and over and over again, 3 times, was going to affect my ability to be a unilaterally dedicated employee. And so I tried to set myself up for success in a clinical environment that allowed me to do that well. Once I was done and the shop was closed, then I knew that I could be a little bit more, go to a different environment. I mean, that's the truth. Yeah, the shop is totally closed, by the way. She's like laughing up. It's true. And these are the things we talk about at Feminine, and these are the things that you two guys are listening to us talk about, but it's important to discuss because women have been bearing these questions by themselves for so long, and they affect our careers, right? And now we find out that men actually want to spend time with their children too, and they want to be present parents. And the last 2 residents I have sent home from clinical shifts for new babies have been guys who have just mistimed their paternity leave, right? So, everyone wins.
I think that segues into one of our guys getting to ask you a question as well.
All right. Hey, guys. My name's Maninder. I'm over at Jacoby Monte. I also went to Downstate, so whoop, whoop. I guess one of the questions that I had was like just a very general one, like, how do you like physically go about setting or finding a niche, right? Like, so I'm one of the conference chiefs, so all I really know is education, which is kind of what you were talking about before. So like in my mind, it's just, oh yeah, stick with something education, like maybe take over conference. Like, I didn't really have any oversight above me when I was kind of planning out the conference schedule and education and stuff. And now I'm staying at the same program. So maybe, I can be that guy and, try to see, I guess, what path opens up there. But I don't know if you have anything in terms of looking or expanding.
Education is a good first step for everybody. Like, I think that is what we're familiar with. It's easy to find something to be done useful. A lot of people do fellowships, which you're not doing, obviously, and that helps you develop your niche. I'd argue that if you don't feel entirely passionate about something that's a fellowship, don't do it, because it does put you in a hole that you may not want to be in. I'll call Mike and make sure that he's supervising you. He should be. But I think that for you, it's like, if you're going to stay at Jacoby, anywhere you're going to stay, it's okay to go into your job not having an answer right away. So I remember when I took my first job, I go up to my boss. It was like, I don't remember what it was like. It was like April or May before I started. I said, what's my thing? He goes, what do you mean? I said, I need to know what my thing is. He's like, you're getting a job. I was like, I know, but am I like an education person? Am I like an administration person? Like, what's my thing? And he's like, I don't know, just learn how to be a doctor. And I was like, okay, I guess that's my thing. And like, it turns out I came in and I was director of the site, but you don't have to have a thing right away all the time, right? You don't, I mean, we all go into it thinking that we want to buy down our time, and that's why we want to have a thing, and we want to have a home, and want to have a mentor, and but you could, like, if you're going to a place like Jacoby or any other academic institution, like, there are lots of opportunities on the landscape, and it's okay to take 6 months or a year to see what opportunities present themselves, and then decide what your thing is, right? Don't work too hard for Mike Jones; he doesn't deserve it.
I guess, yeah. Yeah, Mike's gonna kill me if I say that, but
no, you'll
guess,
find it. It's what?
Yeah, no, I guess so. Kind of a follow up on that. So the other thing is like, if you're staying in the same place and kind of all these people have been your mentors, right?
Right.
How do you try to climb that ladder without stepping on any toes, or because these are the guys that I go to for questions or anything, right? Like, I mean, Mike Jones obviously is different, but I mean, like all the other attendings, kind of, just how do you navigate those waters, or how do you try to find a niche without kind of stepping onto other people's niches?
So first of all, you'd be surprised how many people open the door for you. You don't really have to step on a lot of toes. The second thing is that things change when you become an attending. People treat you differently. They speak to you like you're a peer. The nurses are harder to change, actually. They will always treat you like you're a resident, at least in my experience for a very long time. But the attendings are they're excited for you to become one of them. And so they'll give you that opportunity. And a lot of them will look to bring you into what they're doing because they've been waiting for help. I mean, especially at a city hospital, it's not like you're overstaffed. It's not like there are no projects to get done. It's not like there's nothing to do. People are going to really ask for your help. And then you may find that you want to be the director of a division that has a director. And that may be an awkward thing. But that's going to happen for a long time. And most often it happens around either the person's going to step down and you step up, or you change institutions. I mean, we're much freer now than we used to be. I've changed, this is my third institution since, residency was one place. I had one job and now I have another job. That's a very low number of jobs for somebody for 14 years. Most people have changed jobs actually more frequently than that.
Amazing. I feel like we didn't let Aurelia get a really good chance to ask her own independent question because she'd hopped in on something else. So why don't we turn it over to her?
Yeah, so it seems like finding your niche is more, it's a little bit of trial and error, right? You're not going to be able to know exactly what you want to do until you are in the thick of things and know exactly what that niche entails. How do you though say no to people though, because without worrying that you're missing out on some great opportunity? I feel like that's my biggest worry, is that I'm going to miss out if I don't say yes to everything. That's, one of the big challenges of being chief is you kind of have to say yes to everything. You're supposed to do what everyone else doesn't want to do, is my sense of what my role is right now. How do you say no without feeling like letting people down or missing out on a great opportunity that it could be your niche later on?
So I think that one of the things is every opportunity is not the first or last. So you might get offered the same thing twice. Even if you said no, somebody might still offer it to you again, especially if you're really honest about why you're saying no, right? So you guys are you're walking into a candy store of opportunities, right? And you're like, I don't want to be full before I get to the chocolate covered Oreos, right? I don't know what to eat. I don't know if it's good, right? Am I right or wrong? You're giving me a thing, right? So it's not, every decision isn't the biggest decision of your life, okay? And eventually you're going to eat the chocolate covered Oreo, and it's still going to be there. Or there'll be a whole new batch. Or it's going to be a chocolate covered gummy bear, which I discovered yesterday, which is a disgusting thing. You don't want to eat a chocolate covered gummy bear. But the thing is that as long as you do either what your department needs and you're being a good citizen. So you might do some job that you hate within reason because it's really needed by your department. Or you might, you're going to find the jobs that make you really excited and keep you interested, and you hope that they turn into real niches, right? Like a real job. You're not going to know that right away, what you hate and what you love. So try things out. But don't overpromise yourself, and don't try to do things just because you're supposed to. I don't really believe in that. I'm a good citizen, but I would not join the PNC committee on blood transfusions. There's nothing there for me. It doesn't speak to my talent. It doesn't, it's the opposite of where I should be. There's actually, we had a submission at Feminem for this year, for next year's conference, and I won't tell you who it's from, or even if, I don't know if we're going to take it, but it's on taking the job that nobody wants. And this person talks about how she took a job that was it was available in the ER, as like a site director kind of thing. And she basically turned it into a reflection of what she wanted it to be. And she kind of now loves it, right? You don't know that that's not going to happen to you either. So I guess the thing I would say about all the opportunities that are being put in front of you and like how do you know your niche is going to be, and saying no to everything is, or saying yes to everything is, say yes to reasonable things you want to do. Don't say yes to, like, saying yes to being the assistant program director at a new residency and building that. That's about everything you can do for a couple of years, right? Saying yes to being on the trauma committee for your institution leaves you room to say yes to other things. Know how much space any of those yeses are going to take and how important they are to you. When I said yes to being the associate or the assistant program director to a new residency, I also knew that that encompassed a lot of the career opportunities I was looking for in that moment, right? That's a big yes. There are small yeses, and there are small no's, and then there are big no's. If I had said no to being the associate program director to start a residency, I would have had to find an entirely different niche in my department. Because at that moment, that was the only place anyone that wanted to do education was in that bucket. That's what the department was doing, right? If I wanted to do education, that's where I had to be. And so I was there for a period of time, and then I moved on. And that's kind of how I would say it. Do not have to say yes to everything, but you can say yes to a lot of small things just to see what they're like. Does that make sense?
Can I jump in real quick? I was going to ask.
You
can. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So there's a difference between niche and brand, right?
Yes.
And the thing is, you know, we constantly evolve and we're constantly kind of shifting what our niche is depending on the opportunities that arise. And I feel at the same time, that's the same case with branding yourself as well. I mean, we all change. We're all going to be different people 10 years from now. My question for you is, how did you decide on your brand, and what did you just sit down with a glass of wine one night and you're like, these are the values that I can bring to the market, and here I am.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to be that girl.
You know,
I'm going to be the.
This is who I'm going to be.
Queen
of Superwoman.
No, it's very organic, and when it's not organic, it's not genuine and it's not sustainable. So much of what I've done, like the conference, okay? If I had sat down 3 years ago and said, I want to develop a conference for women in emergency medicine or women in medicine that are going to come from all over the world, they're going to pay hundreds of dollars, they're going to take time out of their lives to sit in a room and listen to other women speak, I would have been crazy. Like that's nuts, right? But instead, and I didn't even know I wanted that. You build this thing, and that thing has legs, and those legs move, and that movement happens, and that, so how did, and I'm true to who I am. Like, so why is it that why did I do Feminam? How did that become my thing? Well, at the end of the day, I'm a disruptive innovator, right? I'm somebody that looks at a problem and tries to solve it in a way that's current. I like technology. I'm a connector. I enjoy bringing people together. All of that is true, whether I'm starting a telemedicine company or Feminam, right? This is just something that I'm passionate about right now, because I see that for me, the women in our field needed a place to come together. And then they're going to do all the work, right? You would be shocked how much of Feminam isn't done by me. Much like Aylin, right? We're sitting here in an academic life and emergency medicine incubator that evolved because of all of the different people that were coming together because of academic life blogs and posts and content that started because Michelle was frustrated at the way education was happening. And she would give all of these, the first time I met Michelle Lynn, right? She gave a lecture at my residency on fractures. And she starts using this very cool technology, like writing on the screen. And I'd never seen anybody do that. And I was like, how does somebody use that kind of technology in a lecture? Like, it was entirely mind-blowing, right? And at that point, she had a very traditional academic career. She was working at UCSF. She was doing all she was doing. And then she decided to develop this blog, Academic Life in Emergency Medicine. And that was like, I don't know, what is it, like 8-10 years ago at this point? It had to be. I was a resident 14 years ago. And so you look at where it's gone. Did she expect to be the academic disruptor of emergency medicine when she started. It was always who she was, right? But her brand became this sustained, like, value-based, evidence-based, aspect of education disruption that now has led the way for a bunch of other people. So your niche, like, it's kind of long, your niche comes from your talent and your interest. Your brand comes from what you've done to build your niche, right? So, like, you don't want to rebrand yourself often. Like, that brand comes with time, and a good sustainable brand comes with the stuff that you built, the real stuff, right? But your niche is something that you kind of, it reflects a lot of what you do and what you like. So the first thing you need to do for you guys is to figure out, what do you like? What speaks to you? What are you doing when you think about nothing and you want to, like, break from your job? What is it that you're doing, right? And then from there, it will all fall into place.
So wise.
Yeah.
Any more?
So Dara, to kind of segue from what you're describing. So, as residents and then now turning into junior faculty start to build this niche or kind of start to build their brand, they're going to be taking on a lot of projects and things that have no monetary support at all. And for you to be able to take such a huge step back from the funded academic positions or from physically just working and seeing patients, how do you then find ways for funding for these innovative projects or other things that you're hoping to get to?
So I'll give you the general answer and then I'll give you my answer, because I think they're very different. So the general answer is that most of the stuff that's fun is not going to be funded, right? That's just the way life works. And I have a couple of friends that are researchers that do research in an area that's less fun to pay for the research they like that is fun, right? Like, that's just the way the funding works. If you have a side project that you want to do, like a side hustle, there are actually a lot of podcasts right now on side hustles in medicine. Like, there's one for women called Hippocratic Hustle. There's another one called Docs Outside the Box. And so you can listen to how people are kind of making their projects work outside of traditional academic medicine. And it's super interesting. If you want, so what did I do, right? So FemInM was never going to be funded by anybody as an entity. Like, I didn't want it to be funded by institution. It was kind of like a balance beam. So when I started FemInM, it was a blog and I had a lot of help, but I really did it as a side gig and I was really academic, and that's where my salary came from. As FemInM started generating a little bit of revenue, so I always viewed it as a business. And it's not because it's not a mission-based. Clearly, everything we've been talking about today is the mission of FemInM. But I viewed it as, and Michelle and I have had this conversation a lot. I viewed it as a business because I felt like it had to be financially sustainable to be valued by me, by my husband, by society, and by the people that were going to then further facilitate its sustainability, right? I didn't want it to be a vanity project or a hobby. So I had a plan of how it was going to generate revenue from the beginning, but I knew I couldn't do that until I developed the community and the culture, right? And so once I had the culture built, I could start leveraging the culture for revenue that was based on the culture and true to the culture, if that makes any sense. And then we started adding other layers of revenue on top of it. And once the revenue got to a point where I felt like eventually it would support my time, I flipped my narrative. So I went to a per diem faculty spot. And so I left my academic title because I wanted to up the game on FemInM. And in all fairness, if I hadn't done that, we never would have had a conference or a podcast or a lot of the other innovative programs we've had. Because by not being employed at an institution full time, I have flexibility I wouldn't have had. I have autonomy I wouldn't have had. And I can generate revenue that I couldn't generate if I was, because most academic institutions, just so you know, put a cap on how much money you can earn on the side from anything loosely related to your career. So a company for women in medicine, because it's in medicine, could not give me, I couldn't work on it more than 1 day a week. Once I was doing that, I had to change my, and that's really important for all you guys. As you look at your niche and how it's being built and what you're doing, you need to understand what the rules are at your institution. If you're working for a contract management group, it's not the same. So if you finish this residency and you go work for a contract management group and you're either an employee or you're a independent contractor, you don't have the same rules. But if you work at an academic institution, there are a lot of rules and parameters on how you can earn money. And so that's what I did. And so now FemM is still not, like, it hasn't supplemented my salary entirely, but it's getting there. And it allows me to feel really good about the time I'm dedicating, because I work harder on FemM than I did ever at an academic institution.
Amazing. Does anybody have any other, burning questions that they have for Dara?
I have a quick question.
I don't want to answer any urinary tract question. Go for it, Gretchen.
I have a question. And maybe, I'm not sure if you're like a book person or not, but I'd love to hear what you're reading now that's interesting to you and inspirational to you, and possibly also then what books you might recommend for new early attendings, maybe things that were inspirational to you early on in your career.
So I'm getting to be a bigger book person. I've been reading a lot lately. I have like a whole huge number of books on my bookshelf. So I would say that, and then I was toying with the idea of writing a book. So that's why also the book thing has become a big deal. So the two books that I would say are really informative to me as a woman professional were lean in with Anne-Marie Slaughter's book, Unfinished Business, Men, Women, Work, and Family. And the two books together speak to the careers of women in medicine, the choices we are making and the choices we're not making. Meaning like the things that we're being asked to do, unpaid labor, the crisis of care, all these things that happen in our lives that were really, 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 really emblematic of what I was dealing with at the time. Okay. Other books I find that a lot of these transformative medicine books, like Being Mortal and all those things, like, When Breath Becomes Air, I find them to be inspiring as a physician because they remind me of the gift that we have to be involved in patients' lives. And I need that sometimes because I find, especially as you guys are new attendings, you're going to be really stuck. And imagining now, I'm sure, not even this year, but last year as residents, like the year before your chief year is the worst year of residency everywhere, right? Because it's the one where you're working the hardest, you're in the weeds, you don't really know why you're doing it anymore, you've lost your perspective. And then hopefully by the last year, you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're going to start making more money, you're going to have a better schedule, whatever it is. Year 1 or 2 of an attending, you feel like you're on a hamster wheel. You're getting a lot of the jobs, you're talking about not saying no to anybody, you're constantly figuring out who you are and what's going on. And half the time you're trying to figure out what your family looks like, no matter who you are. And so figuring out a way that you can be inspired about medicine somewhere in there is a really good idea, whatever that looks like. And so for me, a lot of times it's reading these books that, I don't know if they sensationalize medicine, but they remind me of the gift it is to understand what it is to be a doctor. Because at the end of the day, we're all really lucky. We're a very special sect of society. We have the opportunity to touch people in a way that is, impactful and meaningful every single day we go to work. And that is not something that most people have. And I try not to, I don't forget that anymore, but I think I did for a while.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Amazing. Any other last questions? I feel like that's a kind of an inspirational way to leave it, Dara.
I try. I do this a lot now. This is my 3rd podcast for today, or whatever you want to call it.
Perfect. Did you have any other things you felt like we didn't organically have a conversation about that you wanted as kind of final tips or advice for the team?
Just remember that it'll all come together. You guys are in, residents and chief residents and ER doctors, like we want all the answers right away, and they're not going to come right away, and that's okay. Sometimes space is okay too. You don't have to have all the answers when you graduate. You don't have to have a perfect job. Half of you are going to quit your first job within the first year, and that's okay too. And again, the last thing I want to say actually is sometimes when you're building your niche, you're going to have to take a leap of faith that you never thought you'd have to take. So it may mean moving across the country or quitting academics, which is like blasphemous for everybody. You might find your niche at a contract management group, which is crazy, right? And that's something that we're trained as residents to think is not the greatest path. But there are so many leadership opportunities in those groups. And the best way for people to feel like they're empowered is to be in charge of those groups in a way where physicians are in charge, you know? Most of the people that work in the country don't work in academic institutions. I hate to break it to you. So one of the best things I can leave you guys with is to be open to any opportunities that are put in front of you and unpack the baggage that'll come with some of those opportunities that may make you feel like they aren't really worthy of your time or attention. You'd be surprised where you find your actual happiness.
Amazing. Well, thanks again, Dara, for spending so much time with us. And thank you to the 5 awesome chiefs for your guys' great questions. And you guys know that Dara is super responsive to email. So you can always, I'm going to volunteer her email to all of you to be able to reach out to her as you guys are building your careers and your niches. And, you know, she's an amazing person to, if she's not the one who knows the answer, she 100% knows someone who knows the answer to whatever your questions are. So she's an amazing person to help connect you to, you know, your future areas of interest. So just keep that in mind as you continue to network and build.
Okay. Thank you guys for having me, and thank you for paying attention.
Thank you so much, Dara.
Bye,
Thanks
guys.
for organizing.
Appreciate it.